What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Marianna.
And it's no secret, the fitness industry, the very one that we're in right now, it sucks. Whether it's the corrupt multi-billion-dollar supplement and weight loss industry or the endless supply of influencers promoting absolutely anything to drive page views, the bottom line is we're not trying just to provide another fitness podcast. There's enough of those, but completely change the fitness industry for the better by providing you with the knowledge and tools to give you the confidence to apply the best possible training and nutrition into your own lives. Where today we are talking about the dirty dairy. Something that we've been talking about for a long time. I only title it Dirty Dairy because when I was in my late teens and I learned to hate dairy, it was based on a podcast that called it Dirty Dairy. And I just thought it was funny. I like alliteration. But it stuck with me until this day. But milk used to be touted as one of the healthiest foods you can consume. I don't know if you remember this, but back in like the 90s, I remember I was playing soccer as a kid. Do you remember the Got Milk campaigns? Where all the famous athletes had like a milk mustache. It's packed full of protein and calcium and other nutrients to make you strong. It was all over the place in the bodybuilding community. It was one of the best things you could do to build lean muscle fast. Chocolate milk was a little extra hack as well. But this last decade, milk has been under some heat, mostly on social media and in health documentaries on Netflix, not only doubting the nutritional value, but proposing a list of actual negative health effects as well, saying that these things contain lactose, pus, animal blood, hormones, and more. They're going to destroy your health. So not only just milk, but dairy as a whole. So today we're going to look at the data and find out what role dairy actually can play in our health and if we need to be worried about it in a certain degree.
And if you really like this episode or just the podcast in general, make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you're listening and follow us on Spotify. And if you want more after each episode, join us on Premium for just $5 a month, where we get a bonus Q&A episode every Friday where we answer your own specific questions. And just by being a Fitness Stuff Premium member, you are entered in our $300 Legion supplement giveaway every single month. You can sign up in the show notes below. Speaking of Legion, they have some incredible new protein powder flavors out. If you want to go ahead and try either the apple pie, banana bread, blueberry muffin. I need the banana bread. I really need it. In line with this episode today, a lot of people have some fears and worries about whey protein when it comes to digestive health, gut health, or I can't digest this. It upsets my stomach.
I can't tell you how many times I've been DM'd the same question. Well, what protein do you recommend if I'm lactose intolerant? That's why I'm a big fan of Legions as well. It's an isolate. It doesn't contain lactose. You can have dairy without the lactose. I don't think people realize that.
So it's a great option for people who do struggle to digest lactose. I know I'm personally lactose intolerant. It's a great option and it tastes really good. So you can't really go wrong there. You can use the Legion link in our show notes or type in FS Pod at checkout to get 20% off your first order or double points on every order after that.
And shout out to our second sponsor, the Strong Inside, who has been all about educating you about the complete proteins from milk since day one. And that's essentially what we're doing with this entire episode, is we're taking an unbiased look at dairy, seeing what kind of role it plays. But after this episode, if you want to continue learning even more about this, the stronginside.com is a phenomenal resource to help you learn more about it, along with their protein calculator, which can help you find an ideal protein intake for you. And we're going to put that down in the show notes below, or you can just go check out the stronginside.com. Now today, let's talk about, do you like dirty dairy as much as I keep saying dirty dairy and it's stuck in my head all week? I don't know if you like it, if you're on the same page as me.
Tony and I were talking a while ago and I was like, what did I say? This is going to be the year of dairy, or like,
oh, you did actually.
Dairy is in, like dairy's making a comeback.
It's so hot right now.
Which is so true. I feel like it's so funny too, like how you see trends cycle, but like ordering a whole milk latte instead of almond milk, like that is in. Like
it actually kind of is. I didn't realize it, but it's making a comeback. Even though I feel like you got more millennial, what would be a good word? Diction than me. You use more word, like you say trendy stuff more than I do. I need to get more with the trends. I do.
I'm leaving.
But
I'm out. You just called me a millennial, Tony? I'm younger than you.
I was going to say, technically, I'm a millennial, I think, and you're actually a generation below that. Right?
I'm like the in between. I'm 1997, so I'm old, but it's like in between. Like I'm not.
Okay, so I'm not millennial. You're Gen Z. That's a
so
good thing.
offended.
It's calling you young is what I meant to do.
Okay.
Use more Gen Z terms. That's more like it because millennial, it is getting a little bit old. But we're talking about dairy. And this is true because this is something that I kind of watched as I grew up just kind of deteriorate. And I remember I was like 18, 19 years old when I first had listened to that podcast I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And it was essentially a black to white swing of milk provides all these nutrients. It is phenomenal for us. It is this to it's not only not good for us, but it's damaging our health. It's one of the worst things we could put in our body. It's made to make baby cows turn into 1,200-pound adult cows. It is filled with pus and blood and everything gross. How could you even imagine putting that in your body? Like it was a massive swing, which like I'm like red flag. Things don't
Listen,
change from like black to white overnight. That's not how change
you're
works.
talking to an ex-vegan here. It is crazy how much of it is rooted like a lot of what comes up about dairy on the extreme end. It is very emotional. It's something that I wish I could tell my younger self this, but it's not that deep. Like drinking milk, I'm sorry, but even in each extreme, right? Which Tony and I try to find a middle ground, I think, on a lot of these
Pretty much
topics that do
everything.
have really big extreme ends of the spectrum when it comes to being like for or against. But it's really not that deep. And I think
No.
it's kind of funny how you have, especially the documentaries like, what was it called? Game Changers, really
Game changer.
brought
Yeah.
it
What the
out.
health, game
What
changers,
the
stuff like
health.
that.
It's just interesting to see it evolve, but it's nice to see that you don't see as many people being that extreme about it, but it's still there. Definitely
Big
still
time.
there.
Well, especially with the claims that got me were like the pus and blood and somatic, like stuff like that, where I'm like, if you really like look at what these things are, it's nothing to really be. It's not something when I was a kid, I had no clue what it was. Pus and blood just sounds disgusting. I didn't know if that was realistically in it. I didn't know if it was true or not, but it sounded gross enough for me to run the other way.
I still get comments on my TikToks anytime I talk about being vegan and no longer being vegan anymore. And people will say, no, thank you. I don't need to drink cow pus. I don't need to have cow pus. I'm like, what the hell are
And
you
that's,
talking
I don't know
about?
why, but pus, I'm not going to lie. That word gives me the ick.
Gross.
It makes me gag a little bit. It does.
Yeah.
But fair warning too, we're going to peel back the layers. There's a lot that these people aren't really telling you, I think, is when it comes down to it. So we're going to talk about what dairy is. We're going to define it as simple as it might be, and then go into not just the claims about it, the myths about it, but what the data actually says about our health. And I think this was the last year I hadn't really been putting a ton of effort into learning more about it until we actually had Stan Efferding on our podcast. It was actually an episode that never aired because we had some downloading and transition issues. But he was big because in his vertical diet, he's big on animal-based food sources, one of them being dairy. And that's what really kind of opened my eyes. I was like, okay, let me just look in. This is just something I haven't thought about in a few years. It was just an assumption I held without really any reason why. I think that's what a lot of people have, is they assume that something is good or bad without really exploring why they think that.
Yeah.
This is a really good, and it's in a lot of health areas, right? Not just dairy, but I think that's a pretty common thing that we see a lot today, right?
Yeah.
It's weird.
Tell me about dairy. What is it? What is dairy?
I'm glad you asked. Now, dairy is referring just to a category of food products that are derived from milk, typically from cows, but also from other animals like goats, sheep, buffaloes. I personally have never had buffalo milk. Sounds fun to try. But this includes milk, cheese, yogurt, butter, ice cream, whey, and casein protein, which are the two protein sources coming from milk, but a lot more. Now, these products are produced and processed with treating milk in various ways. So it all starts with milk. It starts with milk and kind of goes from there. Now, dairy is also a significant source of essential nutrients like calcium, protein, vitamins A, B1, 2, 3, and 12, vitamin D, along with several minerals like calcium, potassium, phosphorus, magnesium, zinc, selenium, and iodine. And this is a big, I remember the bodybuilder thing. Do you remember, I don't know if you were even in that side when you were growing up. That used to be the post-workout drink, is you go drink a tall glass of milk or chocolate milk. That was after like high school.
I feel like
weightlifting
muscle
class.
milk. What's it called? Fairlife, not muscle milk. Fairlife. That's still
essentially, they beef up the protein amount, but that's essentially what it is. But it was just go drink a tall glass of milk, which I'm not gonna lie, I love milk with like cookies or a brownie or something chocolatey, but just drinking plain milk by itself.
Nah.
I'm just not drawn to it. Not drawn to it. But the big thing about it is like this contains a lot of micronutrients. This contains a lot. And I think people kind of leave this out or discount it or just don't talk about it a lot. And the one I know it's telling you about, what I was most interested in is looking at the calcium area.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we kind of knew is like, okay, milk's got calcium. That's what it was sold to in like the 90s. But I want to talk about it just for a second because I know we went hard on magnesium as a long time ago, and we went really hard into that. This is actually big too because only about 10 to 30% of Americans get the RDA of calcium through their diet alone. The RDA is about 1,200 milligrams per day. It varies on your age and you go through life, but on average, around 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day. And calcium is for a lot more than just bone health. And I don't think people really realize that. Calcium plays a critical role in muscle function, right? It's essential for muscle contraction and relaxation. A lot of people going through muscle cramps might just have a lack of calcium in their diets and they don't realize that. It's important for nerve transmission, helping transmit nerve impulses throughout the body and regulate the release of uptake of certain neurotransmitters in the brain. Even hormone secretion. Calcium plays a role in certain hormones getting secreted, right, from insulin in the pancreas. I wish mine did that. Parathyroid and calcitonin hormone from the thyroid, right? Synthesizing vitamin D, the whole episode we did on there as well. And also just playing an important role in blood clotting, enzyme function. Calcium's important. And 10 to 30%, meaning the vast majority of Americans don't get enough. And dairy's got a lot.
Yeah.
Dairy's got a lot. I don't have this off the top of my head. Do you know a list of other foods that are high or as high in calcium as dairy?
Spinach. I want to say spinach.
I kind of want to look it up because even I don't think people realize this. Like a cup of low-fat yogurt contains over 25% of the RDA for calcium, 300 milligrams. 1 ounce of cheese contains over 28% of the RDA for calcium. 1 cup of fat-free milk, again, contains over 25% of the RDA for your calcium in these small servings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just not a lot of these foods that are massively calcium rich like dairy. And I thought that was also interesting because I think so many people run away from it, not really thinking about what they could be missing.
Spinach, 1 cup of raw spinach contains 25 milligrams. And it's definitely, you 25? Get more of the calcium from the raw. Yeah.
Oh, so that's, I mean, so that's
but
not
a half
even...
a cup of cooked spinach contains 122 milligrams. Because think about spinach, like you have to use a lot of it. It cooks down a lot. So you're technically like eating a lot more because it gets really small. But spinach is one of the better plant sources of calcium. Broccoli, a cup of raw broccoli has 43 milligrams. So not as much. I would say tofu is probably the next, if you're looking at it for a plant source, tofu is going to be your next best. So a half a cup of raw tofu has 861 milligrams of calcium.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's loaded with soy sources are loaded with calcium. So that would be, I know that's where I really turn to.
Too bad it tastes like ass.
Yeah, it doesn't taste the best. Terrible. I like tofu. You just have to put in the work for it to taste good when you're going to cook it. If you want to go to my Instagram, I have some recipes. Shameless plug. Okay.
I bet you could get me to like a tofu. I'm not. One of your recipes probably could. But
it's like you can like the taste, but some people don't like the texture. If you can't get past the texture, like you can make it crispy, but it's still on the inside tofu. Like it.
I think that would get me. I'm a big texture person. I'm a big texture person. But bottom line is there's not a lot of whole food sources that contain a lot of calcium, not nearly at least close to that of dairy. And not even that, but a lot of milk is fortified with vitamin D, which we did an entire episode on that I can't recommend enough. But these are providing a pretty good dose of a lot of nutrients that a lot of Americans do not get. And a lot of people worldwide do not get. And I think the one reason why, and this is why I kind of strayed away from this too, and I want to get your input because you are lactose intolerant. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good place to start because I know when I was first hearing about this, when I listened to that podcast, there was even numbers being thrown around. And this is before I would care even enough to look at where these numbers came from, if they were real or not. If someone told me 90% of Americans have some degree of lactose intolerant, I was like, well, shoot, that sucks. And then keep moving on and just believe it. I would hear numbers of up to 80, 90% of people have some sort of lactose intolerance and they don't know it. You know, and it was a hard number to find, but that's what they were telling around. And I think a lot of people, at least I did, was when I heard lactose intolerant, I thought that meant 0 milk, 0 dairy, period, the end.
Yeah.
And I think we got to start there. I think that's a big one.
Yeah. And most people don't know that there are varying degrees of lactose intolerant, and it can be very shocking to people. But let's go back to those numbers first about kind of how many people in the US are actually lactose intolerant. So the US prevalence of lactose intolerance is around 36%. In the world, it's around 68%. So different countries are going to have different percentages. But there are definitely a lot of people, a lot of adults that are not diagnosed with lactose intolerance because lactose intolerance can develop in adulthood. And so sometimes it doesn't go captured, but you can't put an exact number on that because we don't know how many people, but it is hypothesized that there are a large group of people that are not diagnosed because it develops later in life. So it's not like when you're younger, parents are picking up on you not being able to digest dairy and going and looking out for that. When you get older, also your digestive system can change a little bit. Things you used to eat, maybe you can't eat as much anymore. That just happens with getting older. And in high school, I used to have a foot-long buffalo chicken sub and a whole bag of potato chips before my volleyball game, and I would play great. If I did that now, I'd be dragging on the floor and wouldn't be able to do that.
Those were the days. I forgot about those where you could just eat a load of crap and then just go do whatever you want, any sport, any activity, and feel fine. And now it's like, I need a 2-hour couch
and that's
nap.
part of, and like that is universally known. So that's also part of the reason why it's like, oh, I just, I can't really eat cheese as much anymore. And some people will adhere to that, and some people will just never know that they're lactose intolerant. But I think it's important to talk a little bit more about what lactose intolerance is, because it is misunderstood, and it is a digestive disorder, and it's characterized by the inability to fully digest lactose, which is a sugar found in milk and dairy products. So when you eat or drink dairy products, enzymes in your small intestine digest lactose. In people with lactose intolerance, a certain enzyme called lactase is missing from the body. You're not producing lactase, or you're not producing sufficient amounts of lactase. So when those people do eat dairy products, the body has no way to break down the lactose, which can lead to the fermentation of sugar, which lactose is a sugar, in the intestines, and it triggers symptoms like diarrhea, nausea, cramps, bloating, and gas.
All the good stuff.
So that is lactose intolerance, and it's not an allergy. An allergy is an immune reaction to the proteins in milk.
Big difference.
So you can be allergic to milk proteins. That is definitely a thing. But you will hear people saying dairy causes inflammation. Dairy only causes inflammation if you are allergic to dairy. Dairy does not.
And that's not something that's common, correct? Like not nearly as common as people. It's two very different things, being lactose intolerant and being allergic to dairy.
Yeah. And if you are lactose intolerant and you don't know and you're still eating dairy, that is not going to be good for your well-being. You're going to have a lot of GI symptoms. You're not going to feel great all the time, and your digestion will be affected. But that's not going to lead to this systemic inflammation throughout your whole body that causes disease. But that's what people will make it out to be.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's also just important to understand that this is the part where I want to take a moment. I need to collect myself because this can get confusing. But people, from a genetic standpoint, those who are lactose intolerant, you're actually, from your genes, you're the normal ones. Now, let me explain that. So in 2002, scientists from Finland examined a broader region of DNA, one that included the lactase gene itself and also surrounding genes. What they identified was a change in the DNA just outside of the lactase gene that was present in lactose tolerant people and absent in lactose intolerant people. So this was a mutation, and it changed the expression level of the lactase gene, which is what allows you to produce lactase to digest lactose. So when this mutation was present, a large quantity of the lactase protein is produced. And when the mutation is absent, very little lactase is made. So being able to digest lactose is a mutation. It is a mutation in your DNA. And it actually became more common because from an evolutionary standpoint, it gave people a genetic advantage to be able to digest lactose. So I think that is just a fun fact in that discovery there. Yeah.
Okay, you say normal, I say freaking stronger, better, cool.
I
I'd
TikTok
way rather
about
have
this,
it.
and so many people are like, "Oh, so I'm a superhero, so I'm cool."
I'm a I'm gonna survive. Y'all are gonna die.
Yeah, so the being lactose intolerant now is a recessive trait. So I'm not going to get into genetics and Punnett squares and things like that.
Losers.
But that is why it's less common. So you don't see it as much, but there are certain countries, especially in Europe, where lactose tolerance is very high. So you don't see as many lactose intolerant individuals in those areas. And that is largely from an evolutionary standpoint. It was more beneficial in those regions to be able to digest lactose, which I think is a really cool fun fact.
Well, it is. I think it's cool because it almost seems like it's a really good thing. Almost your body's
Yeah.
just more capable at doing that
Yeah.
one thing. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And your lactase production can slow as you age. So that would be a case where you see people, not knowing that they're lactose intolerant. It's not a coincidence that in your mid 20s, you're like, why can't I have cheese? Why am I struggling to digest cheese? That's not a coincidence. That is very common for that to happen, for the production to slow. And there are two different types of lactose intolerance. So there's secondary, which it develops when the small intestine's production of lactase decreases after an illness, injury, or surgery involving the small intestine. So this isn't the common one, but diseases associated with this kind of intolerance are celiac disease, bacterial overgrowth, and Crohn's disease. And there's a treatment for this that may restore lactase levels and improve symptoms. Primary lactose intolerance is much more common. This can happen at the start of life. You can make normal levels of lactase. As children replace milk, because again, if you're breastfeeding, as you replace milk with other foods, the lactase production can normally decrease. And it's most common to see that happen at around age 5. But this also can happen later in life around your mid to late 20s. So it stays high enough, lactase production, to digest the amount of dairy in a typical adult diet. But in primary lactose intolerance, the production declines below normal at some point. And all of the reasons aren't completely clear, but that's the most common one.
Well, and that was the biggest piece that I think, not biggest piece, but the biggest misunderstanding about lactose intolerance. And people think that they are intolerant to lactose, is that it can vary in severity for each person. Like just being lactose intolerant doesn't mean you can't have any dairy. You can't have any of it. And that's, at least in my head, I thought if you were lactose intolerant, you weren't supposed to touch it. To where it's like, it doesn't mean you have a complete absence of lactase activity.
Yeah,
you might just have reduced activity of
malabsorption of lactose is what it's called. So you can have, and I was telling Tony this before the episode, you can have varying degrees of malabsorption of lactose on the higher end and lower end. And there are people that are completely lactose intolerant. So any amount of lactose, they will notice a symptom. In communicating in the nutrition field, the lactose intolerance and malabsorption is lumped together. So from a communication standpoint, it is typically just spoken to as lactose intolerance, and there being varying degrees, but the varying degrees come from a malabsorption standpoint. If that confused you, it's not that important.
But because I think it's important to understand, because people might label themselves as lactose intolerant and think, okay, I can't touch it. But I think people would be, I think people would be surprised. Like, you might just have reduced levels of lactase. It means that you still have enough to account for certain things. And certain foods, this is one thing that I got into that really interested me, is different foods contain different levels of lactose. For example, like the whey concentrate versus isolate. Whey isolate is a dairy product that contains no lactose. That's why I'm a big fan of it. And a lot of people notice like, oh, I can digest and tolerate this really well, where a whey concentrate, I can't. Or things like milk and ice cream containing a lot more lactose than things like cheese, yogurts, butters, things like that have a lot less. So people can usually tolerate them a lot more. Like, it's dose dependent, like a lot of problems typically are. And I know you were talking, the cheese thing in Europe cracked me up, because this literally happened to me last week. I was telling you, someone DM'd me when I was talking about doing this episode on dairy, and they're like, talk about the raw versus whatever, because when I go to Europe, I can eat all the cheese in the world, but in America, I can't.
I have made 3 viral TikToks about this, over 1 million views talking about this. People
It's
will
not
go
the raw
to Europe.
or Europe thing.
No. So people will go to Europe and they will say, oh, I can eat all of the dairy I want. I have no stomach issues. I felt completely fine. And there's just something wrong with the dairy in America. Okay. First of all, if you are truly lactose intolerant and you are going to Europe and you're having lactose, if you are having dairy products that are high in lactose, you are going to have a reaction to it. If you have dairy products that are not high in lactose, then you probably won't have a reaction to it. But if you have no reaction to high lactose products when you're in Europe, it's not because it's some magical European thing. You're not lactose intolerant. So let's get that out of the way.
It's a magic force
Second,
field over Europe.
in Europe, so cheese, Tony did mention cheese. There's different levels of lactose in different products. Cheese, not all cheese is low in lactose. If you are having an aged cheese, so aged cheeses have the lowest level of lactose, that is the most widely used in Europe. They use aged cheeses, and they also use a lot of the cheeses that naturally have lower lactose content. So that is why when you go to Europe, maybe you don't notice as many symptoms and you feel fine when you're eating dairy. It's because they are using dairy products with less lactose in them. And also you are walking a shit ton more, so your digestion is just naturally going to improve. I hate that argument. It is so frustrating. But let's talk about this cheese piece, because if you're talking about an American cheese has a crap ton of lactose in it versus a aged Parmesan cheese that's going to have significantly less. So cheeses with the lowest lactose content are Monster cheese, Camembert. Am I saying that right? Camembert?
I'm not going to lie. I was reading that. I've never heard of that before in my life.
I have heard of it, but I never pronounced it. Brie cheese, mild and sharp cheddar, provolone, Gouda, blue, Parmesan, and Swiss.
And these aren't saying these are better or like it's not a better form of cheese. It's just the amount of lactose.
So if you are lactose intolerant, go ahead and see how you feel eating these. And it's kind of sometimes just a guess and check. I know that's how I found out that, wow, I'm totally fine when I am having brie cheese on my charcuterie board and sprinkling cheddar cheese into whatever I'm eating. But when I have feta cheese, I absolutely have to take my Lactaid. Just a little bit of a guess and check, right? There's no exact science there for me, but there are varying degrees of malabsorption of lactose and how you tolerate it. So I just kind of did a guess and check. But that whole Europe bullshit, that pisses me off.
It's the funniest argument because people will take so many things are different about Europe and America, about what you're doing there, what your life is like, especially when you're traveling on vacation. And they'll say, nope, it's the dairy. It's because Europe has better dairy. It's like, no, it's freaking not. You're choosing
Europe has better
battle.
food, point blank, period. That's fine. No one's going to argue that. But when you're talking about lactose intolerant or this is off topic, but people will also say, oh, I can eat all of the gluten in the world. In Europe, first of all, if you have celiac disease, there's no such thing as there's no gluten sensitivity. That's not real. If you have celiac disease, then you are not eating any gluten because you're going to have serious issues. So I know my celiacs out there, when they hear that argument, they get pissed about it because it doesn't apply to them. But this is a tangent. But in Europe, they predominantly produce the hard red wheat. That is their biggest production of wheat, which has the lowest gluten content. The lowest gluten content, our body requires more energy to digest gluten. And sometimes that can cause a little bit of distress and bloating. It doesn't mean that something is wrong. It just requires a bit more energy, and maybe your body is not the best at digesting it, or it just requires a bit more and you notice the symptoms. We use predominantly soft wheat in America, which has the highest gluten content. Okay, so it's not this crazy conspiracy theory. There is a logical explanation, a very sound, known explanation for it.
It makes so much sense.
It's
made out to be a conspiracy. The U.S. government's doing this, and you can tell because I go to Europe and I can eat gluten.
Yeah, like, do we have gross portion sizes? Do we have a ton of fast food? Do we not walk at all? Is that a problem? Yes, that is. I'm not denying that. But when you go out and say that you're just magically can eat gluten, you don't have a problem with gluten. You're just eating food that has virtually no gluten in it. But people don't understand that not all pasta has a lot of gluten, just like with cheese. Same
Basta.
thing.
Dude, I can't stop thinking about charcuterie board since you said that. Dude, give me a good charcuterie board, a little rosé, a little Dean Martin on the radio, and I'm cooking some pasta dinner. That's Tony's heaven on earth. I just want y'all to know
Love
that.
charcuterie board.
A
Sorry, I
little
went off on a
charcuterie
tangent with
board,
that.
a little rosé, and we're good to go. But it cracks me up because that's the argument where people ignore the logical, the easiest explanation, and are like, nope, it's got to be this massive conspiracy that the U.S. government and FDA are plotting against us to make our health terrible. No, it's not.
Yeah.
Right. It just look a little bit deeper, and I promise you, it's like Occam's razor. Right. The simplest answer is usually what the answer truly is. It's not this complicated, drawn out thing most of the time.
Yeah.
Now, that's where I think I thought we should start, because I think a lot of people will either overplay their own intolerance to lactose or self-diagnose when they don't really know, where that's kind of the piece too, where I think it's safe to say, okay, like, test this out, because like we said before, and we're going to go into a few other big pieces and arguments like for and against dairy here in a second. But this is a very micronutrient dense food. And especially if you're someone who might not be getting enough calcium, but could benefit from it, even if you do have some sort of lactose intolerance, I think it's worth testing out with some of these lower lactose foods, because you could still get a stupid high amount of calcium, potassium, vitamin D from these aged cheeses, some yogurts and Greek yogurt, whey protein isolate, things like that with
There's
little
so
lactose.
many lactose-free dairy products. Like, even there's whole brands dedicated to being lactose-free. There's
but you get all of those benefits without this. So it's not just a massive umbrella, which is so important. And I know do you take the digestive enzyme? You said lactase. Do you take that with high?
Oh, I take Lactaid. Yeah. Yeah. So
and is that something you don't take only when you do have it, or is this like a daily thing that you just supplement with?
No, I only take it when I do have, like I just said, if I eat feta, like or cottage cheese.
Don't give me feta.
So looking at like the creamier varieties of cheeses, those have higher lactose content. So I'll take a Lactaid, and it's just so crazy because people like, oh, I'm lactose intolerant. Some people will position it like having celiac disease. Like, you don't have, if you do eat it, like, it's just on you. Like, for me, like when I'm in New York and I want to go get a slice of pizza, I'm going to take my Lactaid. I'm definitely still going to have some issues there. Like, the Lactaid's going to help, but it's my own fault. I know what I'm getting into, and it's temporary.
And it's not going to put you in the hospital and take years off your life, which is so many things to do. Now, that's where I think a lot of pieces start. So now that we understand that, even if you are lactose intolerant, a lot of the times you can still handle, to a degree, right? It's dose dependent. Now, some of the bigger claims are what I wanted to dive into. We can call these myths at all, and I don't even know if I would have said that beforehand, but when I was putting all this together, and I wish you guys could see the little outline that Marianna and I do beforehand. It's actually one of my favorite parts about this podcast, is getting to do all this extra research and digging on all these certain topics, to where now I think so many of these are myths. And I wanted to start with this whole dairy containing dangerous hormones is probably one of the bigger myths that I hear quite a bit, right? I can't believe you drink that. They pump it full of hormones. They're pumping these cows full of hormones. How are you doing it? And it's true, because the scare kind of exists. Like, most cows are given hormones to increase growth and milk production, right? Including, and it's RGBH and bovine, I guess, somatotropin, right? BST. They're given these to do that. That is true. But that doesn't automatically mean something is bad. And I think that's where people draw the conclusion. Same thing with the pus argument, which we'll talk about next. But they hear a word that they just associate as bad. Like, these cows are given hormones, and they think that that automatically means it's bad for their health, or it negatively impacts their health. And I know one of these, the Game Changers documentary, did you watch that one ever?
I did. I didn't watch it fully through, but I've watched bits and pieces but it just made me really mad.
Well, because when it came out, this was probably close to 8-9 years ago, maybe more. I mean,
I watched it late. I didn't watch it when it first came out.
I want to Google real quick. What year is it? Okay, so about 5 years ago is when it came out. And this is when I was kind of like, it shook me enough when I watched it, because everyone was like, you got to watch this. You got to check it out. I mean, it spread like a wildfire. And after I watched it, the claims and everything that was made, I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta look for myself into this thing. Apparently I'm killing myself with all this animal product.
Sorry, I just remembered why I had to watch it. I had to watch it in grad school because it was one of my communications courses, and we had to look at like media that spread misinformation and like point out like how they manipulate research. And that was, we were like, our group was assigned the Game Changers.
It
That's so
was
funny.
one of the
Sorry.
best examples of that. It probably was one of the
Yeah.
best examples of spreading misinformation, misinterpreting research. And I hope you all realize, like, it seems very official when you have a Netflix documentary about something. But you got to realize, and I've seen some phenomenal documentaries in my life too. I love that category of film. But you have to realize too, when you're writing a documentary, generally, and especially in this case, you're trying to show people about one specific thing. So in that tendency, you usually have a bias to show people everything that supports what you're trying to show and then hide anything that doesn't. And in this case, I almost think we could almost do an entire like a whole episode about just the game changers in this field. Because once you go into it, I mean, it's crazy because they would make these massive claims. One of my favorite is that just simply drinking milk decreases testosterone and increases estrogen in men. And they provided research for this. It's like, oh, well, let's look at the actual research. Let's look at the data. This has got to be pretty powerful if you're saying that it decreases testosterone and increases estrogen in men, right? It's got to be big. It's got to be big. That's a huge claim.
Was this a Netflix? This was a Netflix production, right?
Yeah, Netflix production.
We could go to HBO. We could go to HBO and be like, hey, we got this idea.
Oh,
let's attack the Game Changers documentary.
Let's sell it. Okay, let's sell it to HBO. Bookmarking this spot in the podcast so we can go make $1 billion. But anywho, so I mean, it's a big claim, right? Telling men you don't drink dairy because it's going to decrease your testosterone and increase your estrogen. This study that they provided was done with 7 men. 7 men. Let me ask you a question real quick. Is that meaningful at all? 7 people. If you have one study on 7 people, does that mean anything to you?
No.
It's next to nothing. There's not enough people to do anything with. But not only that, let's take a little bit further. One, the milk that they gave these men were from pregnant cows near the actual pregnancy or the actual birth date, right? Late-term pregnant cows.
To put on the shelves. You can't sell that.
Yeah, fun fact. You can't sell that in a grocery store. But this was late-term pregnancy in cows. And you might know this if you've known a pregnant person in your life. There are massive spikes in estrogen and progesterone in late-term pregnancy. Same thing with cows. Hormone profile is completely different when you are late-term pregnant. Now, here's the part that made me laugh the most basing the claims, because all these kind of discredit it. They take it away. Okay, it's 7 people. Big thumbs down. It was milk from late-term pregnant cows. Big thumbs down. But these tests were done not through blood samples collected. These tests were done with urine samples one time, 1 hour before the test, and then 15-minute increments for the following 90 minutes after. That's it. It wasn't done on multiple occasions. It was done on one day where you did a urine test 1 hour before and then 15-minute increments for 90 minutes following ingestion of that milk. Now, 2 things about this. One, urine testosterone tests are not meant to give you an accurate look at what your testosterone levels are at right now. They're not. That's not what they're made to do. They're made to give you a 24-hour average, and even at that, they're not the most accurate thing at doing so. So urine tests just aren't that phenomenal, and definitely not when you're taking 15-minute differences, 15-minute increments. It's a urine essentially is telling you nothing. The second thing, and you know this if you listen to our podcast with Derek from More Plates, More Dates, testosterone in men can drop up to 400 plus nanograms per deciliter in a single day. Massive swings in testosterone in a 24-hour period, meaning your testosterone in the morning and at night are going to be completely different. And here's the funny part. It peaks in the morning and falls from there. The highest your testosterone will be in the day is first thing when you wake up in a fasted state. From there, it's going to go down. So not only are you using a completely inaccurate measuring tool to get these numbers, but your testosterone should naturally go down as the day goes on. So 1 hour before to up to an hour and a half, that's a 2.5 hour time difference. You're going to naturally see, if they didn't eat or drink anything, you're going to naturally see a decline in testosterone scores.
Yeah.
Right. So there are so many things wrong with this, but this is the one piece of evidence they'll use to say, to scare people. That's really what it is, to scare people and say, men, stay away from this. You're going to decrease your testosterone. You're going to increase your estrogen. You might as well turn into a female, right? That's where it comes from, which is ridiculous. So not only that, but this is something I think, when did you talk about hormones?
I think was it in the vegan episode?
It might have been in that because people are still afraid of, wait a second, what about the hormones that do make it through? And I think this is a big case, right? Because hormones in milk are massively just destroyed during the pasteurization process, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah, that's one
from
piece.
there, what even makes it through isn't even broken down in digestion, leaving pretty much nothing to actually affect your body or your health at all.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah. And this is the same
Yeah.
reason I think you can't take oral steroids. If you took testosterone orally, nothing would happen. That's why you have to inject it deep tissue for it to make a difference. Even if you took anabolic steroids, but just plopped them in your mouth, nothing would happen.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
cracks me up, this whole piece about it.
Yeah. And a large study from the Journal of Nutrition, they found that hormones in dairy and beef are digested in the stomach, but don't pass into the bloodstream. We do not absorb them. Humans are incapable of absorbing them. Tony said, that is all you need. We can't absorb them. If you don't absorb anything, it can't exert an effect. You excrete it. It's just comical to me. Animal hormones don't affect human hormone production. They have little to no effect on human biology.
But it sounds scary. That's what this argument, and again, why this Game Changers documentary shook a lot of people, because they make all these massive, scary arguments at things that don't even make sense if you just think about it logically for 10 seconds.
It's also, people don't know that it's elite. All of any cow treated with one of these hormones, they have to be tested to not have any in their system before they are milked, before their milk is used. It is illegal to have a cow with hormones, like any level of hormones in their system. So they do these testing. And of course, there are going to be farms that try and slip under and maybe don't do it, but that's where reports come out. That's where these farms go under and get major lawsuits against them. And you don't see those brands anymore. That is illegal. So that's also something you're not going to, if there are levels, like high levels of these bovine growth hormone found in milk, that milk is getting recalled. That whole company is going under. That is so illegal. That's why the labels, I mean, if it is a milk and it will say that it is hormone free or raised without artificial hormones, that doesn't mean anything. That means nothing, because the milk you're getting, even if they are treated with the hormones, it doesn't have any hormones in it. And also, all naturally occurring foods contain hormones. Plants contain hormones. Technically, there's no such thing as a hormone-free food. That is marketing, like, at its finest. That label that says raised without artificial hormones on the milk allows them to increase the prices. There's also an asterisk next to it that will lead you to a tiny print that says the FDA has stated that there's no significant difference between milk from RBST treated and untreated cows, because there's no difference.
But people don't like to read. That's too small for people to read.
It's really tiny.
That's too
I wish
tiny.
I had a carton
that's
with
too
me.
Tiny. But that's the whole point, is not only, one, if it did contain more hormones, would it not exert an effect on humans? But they really don't contain these massive amounts of hormones like some people would like you to believe. They just don't.
Yeah.
They just simply don't. And if they did, it, like you just said, it would be recalled. It would be destroyed. It would be a big problem. It's not something that just goes around and happens. And I think this is another one where this was comments back on when I said we were doing an episode on dairy. The people that take kind of the next step, they're like, oh no, dairy is good for you, but as long as you get it raw. You got to get it raw. Like, raw dairy is phenomenal. It's that processed, pasteurized crap that you can't put in your body. And that one, at first, again, when I didn't learn about it too much, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. Let's break this down real quick. So the milk that you buy at the store, not the raw milk, the milk that you buy at the store, it goes through three main steps before they're ready to be consumed. First, it gets pasteurized, which is a fancy way of just saying they heat the milk to about 161 degrees for 15 seconds just to kill any unwanted bacteria, which also extends its shelf life, which is a good thing. I don't think people like it kills unwanted bacteria. That's a good thing. We want that. Two is homogenization, where the fat globules are broken into smaller ones and evenly dispersed throughout the milk, right? This is done so that it doesn't just collect and sit like this. And people are like, oh my God, the processing progress, that sounds so bad. It's just done by forcing the milk through smaller holes. That's it. They just push it through smaller holes. That's period, the end. And then the third is fortification, which is adding vitamins and minerals into the milk to make it more nutritious more nutritious, right? Like vitamin D, calcium, omega-3s. So these are all, quote unquote, these are processed pieces. And that's where people are afraid of everything processed. People forget that processing foods, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is probably one of the big reasons too why humans have extended their lifespan over the last couple hundred years. Like, not
Oh
all
my God.
processing techniques are bad things.
It's why we have less birth defects worldwide. It's why we have less malnutrition worldwide. The US has played such a large role in helping third world countries with malnutrition, so nutrient deficiency diseases. And these fortification practices, which are cheap and easy to do and also extend the shelf life of these products, we can send out to third world countries so that they do not suffer from these diseases and babies and mothers aren't dying because they can't afford food or they don't have access to it. And
Yeah.
it's just so inconsiderate. It is so many people on the internet, so many of these health junkies, so many of these extremists like your Carnivore MD, your Flav City, your anyone in a grocery store have no consideration for the one of the largest fields that is public health nutrition. And those people look at diseases amongst populations related to nutrition, related to access to food, affordability of food, and related to socioeconomic status and different ethnic backgrounds and different races and the disparities amongst them. There are so many different reasons why people struggle with nutrition outside of the lens that is just, oh, I don't care about my body, so I'm just going to put whatever the fuck I want into it. These people thinking that they're doing something by pulling up an egg or a carton of milk saying that it has all these hormones in it, you are doing the opposite of anything beneficial, but you are
But it's
reaching the
getting a
people
reaction. Yeah, it's
that
just
have the
getting a
same
reaction.
closed-minded mindset as you, which is not a large group of people, but on social media it seems like it is.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Well, and
I could
it
go off
scares,
about
and
that.
all of it surrounds by just scaring people by big words that they don't understand. And people attach that. If you're scared of something, you're going to hold on to it a little bit more. And that's the biggest kind of crazy part is I'm like, it's the same thing as when we talk about the artificial sweetener conversation or the seed oil conversation. You can't just lump these all together and say, this is bad. All processing techniques are bad. No, which specific one and which specific health outcomes are they tied? You can't just say processed foods are bad, right? Because those are the three steps. Again, all processing techniques, all of these improving the health of a food, improving, not taking away from the health of a food, which is crazy because you even see stuff like this where I know a big argument against the pasteurization process is that it removes any beneficial nutrients. And then you can look this up. I told you because I like to, when putting together these arguments for against foods, whatever it is, I like to see what the arguments are being presented on both sides. So I'll just go to Google and figure this out. And of course, the main names that pop up are the Dr. Axes of the world, the Carnivore MD, the people who are generally touted in the scientific community as quacks, right? Would be a good way to put it. These are the people that have these massive charts showing, look at the nutrient density of raw milk versus pasteurized milk. You're getting 50%, 20%, 30% of the calcium, 20% of the vitamin D. You're getting basically no nutrients from pasteurized milk. And they don't cite a source. They don't tell you where they get this from. And then if you look at the raw data, comparing raw milk nutrients to pasteurized milk data, they are essentially identical, if not in more in some cases. You're getting more vitamin D from pasteurized milk, not less, compared to raw. And all the other nutrients, unless your diet is coming 100% from dairy, you are not going to get a difference in nutrients, period.
Yeah.
Period. So these people, that's why I hate these quote unquote doctors that just tout that name in the MD like anything, is because they will blatantly just make shit up and put it out there.
Yeah, you see this a lot when it comes to gut health. So people make the argument that pasteurized milk has all of the good bacteria killed off. So you should drink raw milk because it contains beneficial bacteria for your gut. It is better for your gut health. Okay. So what I found interesting is because it is harder to find nowadays on Google. I don't always see any good high quality sources come to the top, especially when it is a more controversial topic. You'll see a lot of news outlets, you'll see a lot of pro carnivore, what have you. But when you do get to the research, it's pretty crazy to me that people can even say this. So bacteria found in raw milk, they are not probiotics. So probiotic microorganisms, they must be non-pathogenic. They cannot cause disease. Raw milk can host various human pathogens. Any food that has a shelf life can contain a human pathogen. That's food gets spoiled, that happens. But it is much more likely for raw milk to contain various human pathogens, and it is more susceptible to it. And it happens much more often. So you see a lot of people infected with these from raw milk. You don't see that unless if you're drinking spoiled milk, which it might be unfortunate for you. But so probiotic microorganisms must be of human origin as well in order to have an impact on human health. It can't be coming from the cow. So a lot of the bacteria present in raw milk are from infected udder tissues, the dairy environment, so that could be soil, water, and cow manure, and infected milking equipment. And high bacteria counts in raw milk only indicate poor animal health and poor farm hygiene. If those high levels of bacteria are detected, then again, same thing happens. Go after the farmers. There's a lot of issues there. That milk should not be on the shelf. Just because it has bacteria doesn't mean it's good. And next thing is it can contain high amounts of bifidobacterium, which we talked about a lot in our probiotic episode, which is really beneficial for in the human gut microbiome to have a vast amount of it. And there's a lot of probiotics that contain bifidobacterium. And a lot of these quacks, I'm going to call them, say that this bifidobacterium is what is the good bacteria that you get from raw milk that you don't get in pasteurized milk. And this bacteria is commonly found in humans and animals in their GI tract. So when this milk is high in bifidobacterium, that means that it is present in cows' fecal matter, and that has contaminated the milk. So you do not want to see any levels of bifidobacterium in raw milk because that means it has been contaminated with cow poop.
It's a poop. That's gross. But that's the funny part, right? It's like they're being touted, but it's like, okay, let's dig it like 2 layers deep. And that's the case of it. And that's what pasteurization kind of gets rid of, because this is another piece of it is you're getting rid of a lot of the bad bacteria. You're getting rid of I think this is the stat that kind of alarmed me the most. 71% of all the cases from people getting sick from milk are from raw milk consumption, not pasteurized. Raw milk, because although they tout it has all these great things in it, it also has all that bad crap that can get you sick.
Yes.
That's what pasteurization is meant to get rid of. And you're not really getting rid of anything good or beneficial at all. It kills me. Like these arguments, the more you peel it back, you're like, what the, where does this even come from?
I'm sure this isn't our large audience, but if you have a farm and you have cows and you drink their milk, like that is so nutritious. That's awesome. Talk about farm to table. We're not talking about that. There's these larger farms that produce and sell a lot of this milk, and it's not even to say that they're not adhering to the proper hygiene practices. It is so easy for this contamination to occur, even if you are taking all of the necessary steps. That's why this prevalence of people getting sick from raw milk is so high, because cross-contamination is very, very, very likely when you don't go through that extra step to get rid of the harmful bacteria.
Yeah, that one blew my mind a little bit more too, but these are the good sides of processed, because I know we talk about the ultra processed foods so much in the context of how that as a whole is adding to a lot of the negative health outcomes in America, but that doesn't mean processing just means bad. It just doesn't. Now, the next one I want to go over, and honestly, this is young Tony, kid Tony, this is what scared him straight. The argument of the pus, blood, and somatic cells. And you were even saying, people were commenting on this, like, how are you drinking that pus? Milk is just straight up pus. I mean, first of all, does this not just sound like if you had to make someone afraid of something, what you would say? Blood, pus, somatic cells.
It's gross.
It is. Yeah. It is. And they find the most ridiculous, insignificant details is what you're going to learn about this, which these cracked me up, especially the pus piece. Now, first of all, somatic cells, do they sound scary in the way that you say it like that? Yes. Does anyone who is afraid of somatic cells know what they are? I'm going to say no, they don't. right? Somatic cells just refer to any cell in an organism's body that is not involved in the production of eggs or sperm, i.e., pretty much most cells in every living organism. That's a somatic cell. Now, the pus argument is what grosses me out, just because that word just kind of makes me like that feeling I get in the bottom of my stomach when I'm about to throw up. Just the word. And I don't have a queasy stomach, but that word just makes me feel gross. Now, here's a fun fact. Most cows aren't milked by hand anymore, but by machine, right? It's exponentially faster. It's quicker. It's easier to get the job done, especially for a country that is over 250 million people strong. Now, sometimes these machines can cause cuts, which can lead to infections in cows. And when that happens, the body pumps out white blood cells to fight it. Now, white blood cells are one of the main components of pus. That's important to realize. White blood cells are simply one of the main components of pus. So here's the funny part. When you look at milk that you're buying on the shelves, it does not contain pus. It does not contain pus, period. It contains white blood cells sometimes, which doesn't sound as scary. You're not going to scare someone from not drinking milk. Oh, there's white blood cells involved. That's just in most cows, and especially if they have any kind of cut. They don't contain pus. It's just the main component, so they say pus.
Yeah. And if,
right?
if you're worried, like I feel like some people might be already worried about, well, if the cow is cut, like it's not going to transfer some bacteria. This happens before it's pasteurized. That's
and here's the thing. If a batch of milk ever tests too high in any contamination, the FDA requires it to be destroyed. That's where recalls come from. That's where all this happens. So if there was pus in the milk, a big mess up happened and someone's losing their job, someone's getting in trouble.
Yeah.
Because that is not normal. So people that just say, oh my God, you're drinking that pus milk. No, you're not. The people saying that have no clue what they're talking about. There's no pus in milk. There are white blood cells, which are not a bad thing. And since that's the main component in pus, what sounds scarier? Pus or white blood cells? Pus. Mm-hmm. It's disgusting. Yeah. That's where the argument, it's ridiculous. Same thing with blood, same thing with any of that. And these arguments, like one by one, the ones that I just assumed in my head for so long, just absolutely crumble.
Yeah.
When they come down. And this is the big piece that I wanted you to talk on too, is the full fat dairy and the threat to heart health is another big, I think, myth that kind of people that just kind of hold.
Yeah. And this isn't as common anymore, but it definitely was during the low fat craze of like fat is the enemy. All fat causes heart disease, which we know now is not true. So dairy was very much so lumped into that. A report presented at 2018 Congress of the European Society of Cardiology looked at 20 studies involving almost 25,000 people. They found no association between the consumption of most dairy products and cardiovascular disease. Research suggested that the right kind of dairy may actually prevent heart disease. So another study was done following up when 2,000 men, so this was in men, take that with a grain of salt, but it was published by the British Journal of Nutrition, and it found that those who ate high amounts of fermented dairy products like yogurt and cheeses had a smaller risk of coronary artery disease than men who ate less. Does that mean that dairy is going to decrease heart disease? No, but it may decrease your risk. But also, if you're eating more fermented dairy products, what other more healthful foods might you be having in your diet? So that type of association, there's no cause and effect there. It's more so to analyze and interpret and see if we should be making a public health warning about any foods. It's never a cause and effect. And even if they did see that dairy increase your risk for heart disease, there is a dosage matters. And it's also, then you would need to go and look at those people's greater diet as a whole and lifestyle as a whole. It's never one factor when it comes to nutrition. I want to be really clear with that.
Yeah.
But that's what a lot of these older studies did as well. When they looked at full fat dairy, was they didn't take into account people's diets as a whole.
No, it makes sense though, because you're like, well, how does that even correlate? It's like we listed in the beginning how many vitamins, minerals you have in these foods, in these dairy foods. And I think because like all in all, we're not trying to say like dairy is a superfood that needs to make up a certain percentage of your diet.
There's no such thing as a superfood.
No, that's not what we're saying whatsoever. But we are saying this is a food that's very high in micronutrients that a lot of people don't get. Calcium, potassium especially. it's high in these things that a lot of people don't get. And for some reason, people are not only just afraid of it, but they think it's the devil, the demon that's causing all this negative. So all we really wanted to do is lay this out and say, okay, there's really no negative consequences associated with milk if you don't have an intolerance to it, a very big one.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allergic to it, or there's a specific reason for you not to be drinking it. A lot of people could add this in quantities to help them reach these RDAs of certain micronutrients.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention too, I should have mentioned this at the beginning though, if you are like someone is does not agree with the ethics when it comes to dairy, there's a lot of there are for sure a lot of unethical dairy farms, and if you're feel very strongly about that, that's not at all, we're never trying to convince anyone otherwise, especially if you're doing anything with good intentions. And Tony is really great at acknowledging that there's a lot of people have better intentions than sometimes they communicate. But this is not us trying to convince anyone that they should, if it
crosses their ethics,
with their ethics and their values and beliefs at all.
No.
But if you are on the fence, if you do have some of these preconceived notions that are keeping you from eating dairy when you otherwise could, and you're wondering about it, you hear about it a lot, you're kind of confused, hopefully this clears some things up. And
I mean, that's what it is. It comes down to like just the whole, and I know a lot of people will have that same bias too, where if they, sometimes it does conflict with their ethics, they'll also try and take it down from a health perspective, which is a totally different argument, where it's like you can be okay with that not being in line with your ethics, but you can't spread misinformation sometimes about these. And I mean, it goes to the same thing, not even aside of these, but even like as a protein source, like people forget whey is the most bioavailable source of protein for your body. It gets digested better than eggs, better than chicken. Like it is the number one on the list because of that complete amino acid profile that we talk about with the Strong Inside ad for the last couple months as well. Like it is a great source of so many pieces, where if you're someone who, and again, we always talk about this, what's the chronometer? If you ever track your nutrition for a few weeks with chronometer to find out where you're lacking with certain micronutrients, dairy could be a great piece of that puzzle to help fill everything in. Doesn't have to be, not required. You can definitely hit it in different routes, but it does provide a lot of things that a lot of people could use help with. So that's all we're trying to do today is not, I mean, that's what we're trying to do with every podcast, right? We're just trying to peel back and look at the data. That's what we're doing. Look at the data.
Look at the data.
Just look at it. So that's what we got rolling on. And that's what, I mean, honestly, I would say too, if you're someone who does have some sort of lactose intolerance and you've stayed away from whey protein, try Legion's out, the isolate. And they also have a money back guarantee. You don't even have to send the product back. If it upsets your stomach, if you don't like it, tell them. They'll refund you 100%. Or just try these foods, the yogurts, the cheeses, the things like that have lower lactose levels. See what you can tolerate.
Yeah. A lot of brands now too have lactose-free versions. I know some people, since cottage cheese is very high in lactose, there's a lot of lactose-free cottage cheese. If you've been missing out on that, there's lactose-free. There's so many different, even the cheeses and that's no lactose. So
where's the cheese? It's under the sauce. Do you remember that? It's under the sauce.
Yes, I actually made a TikTok video to that. That's so funny.
It's under the sauce.
I did.
It's under the sauce.
It was a trend.
But that's what we got rolling on for our good old dirty dairy friend, right? So hopefully this helped alleviate a little fear that you might have had going towards this, or maybe just affirm. Maybe you've been on this team all along, which kudos to you for that. Proud to have you as a listener. But thank y'all. You know where to find us. Follow up. If you guys have specific Q&As you want us to expand on, you can ask them in the Ask Me Anything or Q&A style episodes that we come out with every single Friday in the premium. That'll be in the show notes below if you want to check it out for just $5 a month. Or you can shoot us a DM on Instagram. Ask us how we're doing. Give us some feedback, and we always love to hear about it. So that's what we got. We hope you all have a beautiful rest of your week. Have the best Monday of your entire life. And we love you. Live. Hope you have the best Monday of your entire life.